Is pick 18 just as important as pick 6 for Washington? Find out next on Locked On Wizards.
You are Locked On Wizards, your daily Washington Wizards podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello all and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Wizards, where myself, Abdullah Ayubi, co-host and diehard Wizards fan that provides hometown insights and passion for his beloved Wizards, talk about the significance of pick 18. And I am here with the great Leif Thulin, a credentialed NBA draft analyst attendee of the last two NBA combines and host of Locked On NBA Big Board. Thanks for making Locked On Wizards your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And remember, Locked On Wizards is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Wizards, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, which top prospect do you see most likely falling to pick 18? Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Leif, let's not waste your time. Let's dive right in. Pick 18. Is there a possibility where the Wizards could land a star? And if so, could that be the likes of Thomas Sorber out of Georgetown, Carter Bryant out of Arizona, Danny Wolf, a guy that I've been talking about for a while, and Nique Clifford from Colorado State, a guy who maybe could be there at 18? Who do you see? And what's the odds, because you're a big stats guy, of the Wizards landing a star at 18?
I'd say it's slim, but there are good picks everywhere in the draft. So I think you always have a chance, but I would say it's unlikely to get a star. I think once you reach past 10 in the draft, so 11 through 30, it's about a 50% chance that guy's a role player in the NBA that lasting more than 3 years. So the odds of drafting a star are far slimmer than at number 6. But as we talked about number 6, that's yielded a 20% success rate the last 20 years and basically the same thing through 30 years. So I do like this draft in terms of that area at 18, even 14 through 25. I think there are a lot of good players that seem to be likely to be projected there. You mentioned a couple guys. I think Sorber's got interesting traits that could make him somewhat of a standout, because you don't typically see someone that productive with those raw of traits fall that far. However, he does not wow me in terms of like jumping out of the gym film, but he does have interesting characteristics that you don't typically see. And you ask, is it more important to nail pick 18 than 6? Probably not, because at 6, the Wizards they're at a bit of a crossroads. They're at a bit of a liminal space in which the Wizards can chart their own path, and they could go for a guy that's a role player that we project to be a role player. So let's go, for example, Con Knipple, someone who can excel in his role, and that could be a good pick. Or they could swing for the fences, and if they hit there, fantastic. And that's where the dilemma comes. Whereas at 18, because the odds are so much slimmer of drafting a star, I think it's more of a sure thing that the Wizards can find someone at 6 that's good, and that's more important, because at 18, it doesn't matter, because you're such a youthful core that you can try for something that's a home run pick, and it could miss, but it may be more impactful down the road, in the sense that if you hit at 18 and do a fine job at 6, it looks better than if you did a really good job at 6, but it's still not an all-star. Like, the difference between the 6 picks isn't that vast, and 18's a miss. I think swinging for offenses is totally acceptable at the 18th pick.
Yeah, especially if this draft class is considered much more stronger than last year's. There is a possibility of getting that guy who could definitely make an impact, or down the line in year 2, year 3, make his name on the team. For Washington, again, maybe a guy like Thomas Sorber, bring him, hometown kid from Georgetown. You talked about his traits as a NBA draft prospect. It is very intriguing. But let me ask you this, and I agree with all the takes that you had. You get Knipple at 6, and maybe you swing more in the fences of 6 rather than 18. Is there, if you're the NBA GM, do you put more emphasis on fit or best player available when you're at that selection of 18?
Yeah, so it's interesting, because the Wizards, I feel like, have a decent depth of, hey, we're pretty good here, we're youthful here. It's not like there's a glaring fit or glaring need that would be considered a fit. I do think if the Wizards were to take a big at 6, it would be unlikely to take a big at 18. At 18, the best players, I think, largely are wings. I think you can make an argument for Wolf, Sorber. My favorite of the trio of bigs would be Maxime Reynaud from Stanford, and I think he's more versatile than those two guys. But I think the wings are far more alluring to me if I drafted Derrick Queen or Common Maluach than drafting another big. And if you draft a wing, let's say you draft Con Knipple, I think a big becomes more alluring, not because of roster construction, but you already have what's on the roster and it's no glaring needs because it's a fairly well-built, balanced, youthful roster. So therefore being redundant in draft pick, unless there's a guy who's fallen and you're in love with that pick, I think it's likely going to be one wing, one big. But I'm very curious to see what happens. I think there are some teams in this draft. So I reference the Jazz occasionally. The Jazz, I think at pick 5, just need to pick a solid player. I would recommend for them drafting Trey Johnson, but pick 21 matters more than pick 5 to me because the Jazz don't have the core that the Wizards do at this point. And so unless they can draft a star, and maybe Trey Johnson can be that, and it changes, then I would imagine that they need to get a good player at 21 to make them feel more happy about the draft, where they also fell 4 spots, much like the Wizards. Whereas the Wizards, I think you can swing for the fences at 21 and at 18, whereas the Jazz have to swing for the fences at 21, and the Wizards could be steady at 6, and it's seen as less of a travesty.
Yeah, especially since the Wizards have a lot of draft capital. Will Dawkins accumulated a lot of that draft capital when he was trading those veterans out here in DC, and those pick swaps that he has with Phoenix, which I think down the line is definitely going to be worth a while to notice. Also for the Wizards, I sent you that tweet of mock draft talking about how Derrick Queen could potentially fall to 18. Is there any possibility of that, or there's no way he falls out of the top 12?
I'd be pretty shocked. I do think there's a world in which Maluach goes above him, and then there's a few guys that, or a few teams that don't need a center, and therefore may think, you know what, we'll try to supplement the teams, because I think what's changing the NBA right now is the CBA is dictating that you need depth, and so the best way to get talented depth is hit on rookies and have rookies be good earlier because you're paying them minimums. I mean, you're paying them the rookie deal, which is not a veteran minimum, so don't get on me for that. But you're paying a minimal amount of money for those type of players. So if you can hit on a mid round pick, it becomes more and more important. So a guy that we think is going to be ball dominant, Derrick Queen, is for teams that are poor, whereas better teams that are starting to draft, 10 through 15 may not be as interested in a guy like Derrick Queen because they want to see if they can supplement the roster with a guy who'll play immediately and supplement winning immediately. And so for better or worse, I think that could lead to him slipping. I don't think he falls quite to 18, but I think you're going to see a lot of players. You mentioned one like Nique Clifford. Nique Clifford might be someone who gets picked earlier than many expect because he's ready to go from day one. He's the 5th-year senior. He steps in. He should be good from day one, have a Josh Hart type of role. Whereas many people would project Will Riley as the higher upside guy who's projected in the 15 to 20 range as well. But he's an 18-year-old from Canada who played at Illinois, was kind of hot and cold season, hot and cold shooter. He may end up being the better pro down the road, but I think that type of thing is going to impact the Wizards at 18 and a lot of these teams that are making a decision, do we go boom or bust? I think more teams are going to think about being steady in those mid-range picks. And that's why I think the Wizards have a luxury of having 2 picks this year, one where they could go boom or bust at 18 because they can be steady at 6 and it doesn't hurt them as badly to do so, as opposed to trying to draft a franchise-altering talent that has significant risk and then going steady, which is typically something that teams with 2 picks do.
Yeah, definitely. I think the flexibility there with 2 picks makes it a lot easier for Dawkins and his crew. And I think a big reason for me, and I think a lot of Wizards fans, why they should be confident in Will Dawkins is look at the resume of last year. You hit on all 3 first-round picks, essentially. All 3 first-round picks got better as the year went by last year. And considering a weak draft class, I know the players themselves, I think it was Keyshawn George when asked about it, or Bob Carrington when asked about if it was a weak draft class. He didn't think it was a weak draft class, but you get guys who are definitely going to make their mark and be franchise-altering players here in Washington, be cornerstone players. And getting this pick was also, for those of you that don't know, you get it in the trade with Memphis at pick 18. And it's a higher pick. I mean, you get Keyshawn George at 24 and 6 spots above. A lot of people want to talk about pick 6. It is what it is. The Wizards should have gotten a top 3 pick, but not only do they have pick 6, they also have pick 18. And I think pick 18 is definitely a guy where maybe Nique Clifford, maybe Thomas Sorber, maybe Carter Bryant. A lot of these guys, there's a lot of options here. I think if you really think about it, if you go guard and a guy in Jeremiah Fears, who knows, maybe Trey Johnson falls. Do you potentially double down and get a guard at 18? I don't think that's going to happen. I think you at least pick 6 or pick 18. You're going to get a big man. I think you need to get a big man, especially with the rotation of Alex Sarr and Tristan Vucevic, it would be ideal to add another 7-footer. And before we talk about transition to the next segment, I want to talk about Danny Wolf. But before we do, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. The NBA finals are underway. The Pacers versus Thunder, and the MVP SGA has been on fire recently. Or you could look at Tyrese Halliburton, who is a playoff riser. Find who you like, place the prop bet, and win. You can combine live prop bets mid-game while watching, and then you can start to see the trend on who's heating up and who's going to step up. Why not back it with the same game parlay and pick 2 players in the same game to have great games? New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Wizards. I'm Abdullah, Ayubi's Leif, Thulin, and we are talking about Pick 18 and the significance of Pick 18. How important is it for this Wizards franchise, a franchise who back-to-back in the lottery, you get the number 1 overall pick, you don't get number 2, you don't get number 3, you don't get number 4, you don't get number 5, but you get number 6 and you get Pick 18 and you deal with what you got. I want to talk about a guy that I've been raving about for his past couple of weeks, a guy who a lot of people say could be potentially better than Derrick Queen and Maluach, Danny Wolf. For me, Leif, I think his size, his ability as a 7-footer to move like a guard, it's just very rare to find in today's NBA, especially a guy who's efficient at him. Is there some concerns about him as a prospect that a lot of people you think are overlooking, especially a guy like me?
Well, my concern about Danny Wolf, if I'm nitpicking to begin with here, is he played at Yale for 3 years and went to Michigan. And Michigan, he had the ball in his hands and was a primary facilitator for a team that employed 2 bigs. So what that means is he had the ball in his hands a ton and was quite turnover prone, but he made some spectacular plays, warranting the consideration he's getting in first-round buzz. But my question is to you, how many teams, whether the Wizards or any other team, would say, you know what, Danny Wolf, we're going to let that defining trait of you running pick and rolls at 7 feet tall, how many teams are going to let him do that? So that's my pause there. And the other pause, the reason I referenced the 2 bigs, is the other big, Vlad Golden, was the actual rim protector. Danny Wolf, though nimble, was not a good defender. He's not a dominant rebounder either, and he's not a very good shooter. He's got good touch. He's got good intangibles, a great passer for his size, moves well for his size. But it does concern me that he's neither a 5 defensively, nor are there that many players that I think, teams or players for that matter, that I think are willing to conduct through a guy like that. But I will give you this as pushback to my own point. Kyle Filipowski, I didn't like particularly much at Duke, and Danny Wolf had the ball way more in his hands, far more of a track record of being an operator with the ball in his hands. And Filipowski was very good to finish the season, inept defensively, and that inept might be kind, but he was poor defensively. But his offense may keep him in the league for a while because he was an initiator. He was a hub. We talk about Queen having the ability to be an offensive hub. I think those type of guys can be second unit offensive hubs. The Filipowskis, the Wolves of the world. So I think Danny Wolf is a bit of a swing. He comes with risk, but the Wizards may be able to cover up his ineptitude defensively because Alex Sarr can be great defensively. And so while you want to firm up the interior, I'm not sure he does so defensively or on the glass, but he does provide versatility and give you an option. Sorber would be the one that would make you a very good defensive team if he pans out. But I'd be curious. And like I said, Maxime Reynaud is the one who combines the two. I think he can be a really good defender, and I think he's just as skillful, if not more so, than is Danny Wolf. He's just less spoken about because he went to a smaller school.
I was going to bring up the fact, those were great points. The fact that when it comes to compatibility, how do you think Wolf and Sarr would be compared to the likes of Maluach and Sarr, or Queen or Sarr, or the guy that you brought up? Do you think there's a distinction, a huge significance between the Wolf and Sarr compared to other guys?
Well, it's interesting though, because this is operating under the assumption that you would play them together, which, ideally if they end up great, then fantastic. But it's very likely that they end up being a second unit big, and then they play separately. So compatibility wise, I think that playing Sarr with Wolf is interesting, and that puts a lot of responsibility on Sarr to be a great rim protector. Whereas if I'm building the Washington franchise, I'd like Sarr to be my power forward on defense and have a big body to protect the rim, and which is why I'm so interested by the potential fit of Maluach, just because of that sheer size and length and defensive versatility. You take away the rim altogether. You look at some of these better teams in the NBA, and they play two bigs. Like the Thunder employ Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein. You have Naz Reid and Gobert, and you have Randall and Gobert. Like these type of teams have been working, and I think will be working for a while, because you got to stop drives and make teams shoot difficult shots. And so that's one I think works the best together. Maybe you'll have some issues offensively if Sarr can't step out and shoot threes, but I'm not so sure that Wolf's a fantastic shooter. He would be, the hope there would be if he comes off screens that he's able to distribute and be a facilitator. But I'm not sure I would hitch my wagon to Wolf being the fantastic facilitator you saw at Michigan in the NBA, because I think teams will be able to sniff it out and use their size and strength better than collegiate teams do to combat a 4 or 5 pick and roll with 2 7-footers.
Yeah, I definitely great points there. You brought up the fact that offensively, maybe shooting wise might not be the best for Danny Wolf, but the playmaking is there. And again, I think it will go back to fit and which NBA team picks him. And if the Wizards do, it's really going to be interesting to see how him and Sarr would pan out. For me, I think I've talked about this with Derrick Queen, but it would be awesome to get a big man tandem like the DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, where they play off each other really well. So if you had to say out of all the big men, do you think, and we're talking about Sarr with one of these guys, do you think it's more Queen than Maluach? This is a little off topic, but this is something that, again, if you're the Wizards, you want to build as many franchise cornerstone guys, and getting a tandem like a prime DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis. Not saying they're going to end up being like them, but the play style would be awesome, because this is something we haven't seen here in DC.
I would be more intrigued as a fan of basketball to watch Queen, just to see if he can be a low post scorer. You have the protection possibility of Sarr behind him, and you just have this dynamic offensive hub. And that's why I think he's got the higher potential of being an all-star than Maluach. And so maybe I'm just taking the player I think could be the more dynamic. I think Maluach, his skill set maybe even more of a clean fit, because he'll catch lobs. It lets Sarr step out. And if Sarr starts knocking down threes, that changes everything in DC. Like that makes the Wizards so much more dynamic. If he can play the 4, much like Evan Mobley was second team All-NBA, the defensive player of the year, like that's the pathway. He wants to emulate Chet Holmgren and Evan Mobley, lead a 1 seed and be the best defender on the team, because he can play 4 or 5 on defense, switch, protect the rim, do all those things, and knock down open shots, as well as be someone who can score on the interior. Like that's what has to happen in order for Maluach to fit well, because you need to have spacing. But Maluach and Sarr defensively would be a dynamic tandem. They'd be blocking all the shots. I mean, this is a crazy one, but if I were the Spurs and I were picking at 9, where they were supposed to be, as opposed to going all the way up to 2.
Don't give the Spurs ideas, Leif. I know what you're about to say.
I would have considered picking Maluach at 8 or 9, because I think that you would not be able to score baskets on them. And that matters in basketball. It's not as flashy, but you look at some of these teams that are winning right now. The Thunder forced like 19 turnovers in the first half of the finals tonight. Well, you know what helps force turnovers? If the team's terrified to shoot near the basket and they kick it out and you just anticipate and steal, you take risks because the basket's taken away. So that would be the pitch for the Wizards. You're right. You're thinking, you know what? We're going to have such an enforcer at the rim between these two big guys with tremendous wingspans and timing and all that stuff. And we're going to take gambles in the passing lanes with Bilal Coulibaly. Like, I can see that vision, and I will not. I've said this to you off camera. I've said this on the air for people who listen every day. I wouldn't be surprised the Wizards take Maluach. It may not be the sexy pick, but I think it would be one that's got a sneakily high floor and a solid ceiling, especially considering he's considered a raw pick. So at 18, to tie this back in, you'd be hoping you could get that same level of value for per the pick, like 6th pick Maluach, 18th level value from Sorber, from that same idea of playing 2 twin towers together, blocking the rim, and hopefully defensively the team's really good. But I think Ray knows the guy. If you're looking for a big, and I said this to you the other day, I think he's overlooked. If he's there at 18, I wouldn't be surprised if you take him.
So do you see a big possibility where the Wizards just don't draft a guard at all at pick 6 or 18?
Like I said, I think if you draft a big at 6, whether it's Maluach or Queen, if you draft Maluach, I'd be stunned if you take another big. If you take Queen, I'd be pretty surprised you take another big. I think you're going to take one wing and one big. I don't know if it's going to be a guard necessarily. I think there's better wings than there are guards around the 18th pick. But I like if it's Derrick Queen and Nique Clifford, I think that could work. I think if it's a common Maluach, maybe you go for someone who's more offensively oriented because you took a defensive guy. And it's not super precise science here. It's just the way I feel that most teams with 2 picks operate.
Gotcha. I think bringing a guy like Maluach, I mean, the Wizards have been so bad defensively, the bottom 5, rebounding as well. So he'll definitely change the game here. But before we talk about the significance of pick 18 and maybe potentially pairing it up and trading it to go up into the lottery, we'll take a quick break. Welcome back to Locked On Wizards. I'm Abdullah Ayubi here with Leif, Thulin, talking about our beloved Washington Wizards and what they could do at pick 18. So, Leif, is there a possibility where if you're the Wizards, you see Maluach or Queen dropping out of the top 10, do you pair up pick 18 and maybe a guy in Corey Kispert? Or, again, the idea of trading Jordan Poole hasn't been talked about that much compared to last year, where the ideas of trading Kyle Kuzma or other wings on the team. And we didn't think it was, but that brings up another point that I'm hitting myself here for a second. None of us thought Denny Avdija was going to get traded, and he gets traded in exchange for that draft pick that you draft Bob Carrington. So is there a world where the Wizards see Maluach or Queen or maybe another big man that they really like dropping and they trade up into the lottery?
I do think so. I think there's a world where the Wizards see one of those guys fall to 10 or another player that they really like. Maybe it's a Carter Bryant type. I've told you I really liked him as well. And they say, you know what? What good is keeping 18 and a next year's first rounder and move and why not get a guy we really like now, because the core is there in Washington. I think you need one guy to be the top offensive option, like I've said numerous times over the last couple of weeks. And that could come next year. It could come maybe in the form of the 6th pick if you get fortunate. But I think the supplementing the core with the ideal pieces that the Wizards front office hand picks is the right thing to do. So if you think a guy that you value as a top 10 pick is slipping, maybe he goes to 12, and maybe you even value him higher, I think packaging 18 in a future first or 18 in Corey Kispert is a no-brainer. And I tend to believe in the aggression of general managers works better than sitting and hoping, because other teams are also going to try to trade up for guys that could be slipping. Like if Derrick Queen starts to slip, unless it's a medical thing, I don't think many teams are going to stand pat and be like, oh yeah, let's just let him fall, see where he goes. Let's see if we can get him at 24. Like someone in the 20s is then going to jump up. So I think being aggressive is something that has benefited Washington before, and I think would be a very good idea. And I think teams with multiple picks, especially with a young roster, because how many players on the Wizards are 22 and younger, like an inordinate amount of players. So why not trade up and try to consolidate and get a guy you think can compete with those other guys super youthful, as opposed to drafting 2 rookies, 3 rookies every single cycle? And how many can stay on the roster? Not that many as they continue to develop. So you got to move up and make those aggressive moves, in my opinion.
And I think you have the draft capital. But the one question I want to ask you is how much of a difference when it comes to cost, because this year's draft class is a lot more stronger than last year's. We're talking about a lot of potential stars in this year's draft compared to last year. So if you're Will Dawkins, is there a possibility where you give up just one first round pick, or do you think you're going to have to attach Jordan Poole and a guy in Corey Kispert? I mean, how much do you see the difference of value when it comes to this year's draft and last year's draft when it comes to trading up, especially in the lottery?
I think it'll be harder to get into the lottery, that's for sure, because last year there was only 3 guys I thought were top tier talents last year, and I'm not even saying top tier of normal years, but years where I think, hey, this guy maybe if everything goes absolutely right can be an all-star, as opposed to this year I think there's 4 or 5 guys I think can be all NBA if everything goes right. Like that's enormous distinction. So trading up this year into the top 5 or 6 going to be very, very difficult compared to last year. Trading up to 10, more difficult. But I think once you get into 12, there are teams that feel more confident in having an established basketball player. So if you're to ask a team, would we rather have Corey Kispert at the 14th pick? People overvalue the 14th pick. I mean, I believe that's where Kispert was taken anyway, so that's why I said it. But if you're to have 14,
it was actually pick 15, Leif.
15, okay. So let's say pick 15, and that's only 3 spots, so less of a one. But let's say 12 for the example. Let's say 12, and you're seeing a guy you like, and it's Corey Kispert for 12. I think it's more likely Corey Kispert is more beneficial to the team picking 12th overall than that pick, because that team was in the play-in. Like, that's how it should work. That's how it does work often. I'm not saying that they would take Corey Kispert because maybe he doesn't fit in their plans, but I think that value is overlooked at times, and steady role players are going to become more and more of a hot commodity than ever before because of the new CBA that makes it so teams can't just have tons of star power. You need to build your team with enormous depth. Like, that's why the Pacers are ahead of the curve. That's why the Timberwolves have done well as well. They traded Karl Anthony Towns for DiVincenzo and Randall, and honestly, I thought it was a terrible trade, but they get 60 minutes out of those guys as opposed to 34 from Karl Anthony Towns. And so I think there's going to be more and more of those strategic trades to get role players, and I think there is a way to make a trade off of a guy like Kispert. The only issue with him is his contract is dwindling, it's expiring, so it becomes a little less of a luring trade. But who knows? My point being, be aggressive, try trading contracts. If you can get a guy you want, go get him. And I think that's what the Wizards will do, and that's what I think they should do.
And we've seen the track record from Will Dawkins. He's proven that he wants to be aggressive. He wants to be patient with this rebuild here in DC, but he wants to get those right guys. And I think the number one thing that he did, again, I'll keep talking about it, was trading for Bob Carrington and trading Denny Avdia, because, again, Denny Avdia was the guy that a lot of people thought was going to take over the reins here in Washington, be that number one guy. But then you get a guy in Bob Carrington who you were high on in the draft, and he got a lot better throughout the season. So Will Dawkins has proven it that he can be aggressive. I don't see why not happening again. My thing is, another question I'm talking to myself and a lot of Wizards fans are wondering is there a possibility where they trade up and they don't draft a big, but instead they might go for a wing or a guard if Fears falls? But do you see a possibility where Fears falls out of the top 8 or not really?
I was kind of hearing even before this last week where it sounds like everyone's moving him up. I'd kind of heard that 8 was the most likely destination at Brooklyn. So I figured if Brooklyn maybe said they liked someone else that fell, like maybe it could be a Maluach, for instance, then maybe Fears could fall to 10, 11. Right now I'm thinking that he's not falling beyond 6. Whether it's the Wizards or someone else, it just sounds like everyone's loving what he's doing in workouts. And when there's smoke, there's usually a fire. Like, there's always a bunch of smoke around drafts, but when there's this much, I think there's some reality to it. And I'm very curious which team's going to pull the trigger on Jeremiah Fears, because the mocks.
He's big boomer bust, Leif. I'm really, as much as I love his playmaking ability is high bust potential.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you were to ask me to rank out all-star potential, he's top 5. But if you were to rank out floors, I think he's closer to 10 or 11. And that's scary, but all-star potential really matters. And I think that you got to be not too particular in these type of drafts, because if you start thinking, oh, maybe if he's not that great, then we can't take him, and you miss out on an all-star, it really is unfortunate. It sets you back a couple of years.
Yeah, it's this draft's going to be really, really interesting. And again, going back to pick 18, Leif, before we wrap it up, the names that I mentioned, Thomas Sorber, Carter Bryant, your guy, Danny Wolf, Nique Clifford, what is the most realistic guy that you see is going to be on the board there at pick 18 for Washington?
I think all those guys are going to factor in. I think the pipe dream for the Wizards is one of these really athletic wings that's being projected 10 through 15 falls. And so that's like a Cedric Coward, a Carter Bryant. I don't think those guys get there. So then the next tier of wings to me is Nique Clifford. I think you could look at Will Riley, who is a little bit reminiscent of Keyshawn George, and that's a slender wing who can shoot the ball, except he is 18 years old. And that really does matter in a developmental curve. You could look at a guy like Liam McNeely, who much of the season was projected as a lottery pick, but hasn't garnered as much buzz recently. I'd be very curious to see where he goes. I think he's a really steady player. He reminds me a little bit of Bojan Bogdanovic, just a broad-shouldered, big-bodied guy who can score the basketball and do a plethora of things. So I think there's plenty of wings there. That's what I think is most likely, particularly because I kind of think the Wizards take a big. Like, it's just for some reason I can't get out of my mind the Wizards take a big at 6.
At 6 and 18?
At 6, I think they take a big. So therefore, I think the wings are the most likely. Should they take Con Knippel, I think you look at a Thomas Sorber, Maxime Reynaud. I think you could get Danny Wolf. I do wonder if Wolf factors into the way that Washington plays, because they're very heavy on the emphasis of athleticism. So that'll be something that'll be, does the skill set make you wonder enough to go for him as opposed to picking athletes upon athletes like they did.
But one last
Third
question, Leif. Do you think athleticism in today's NBA, especially because we've seen guys like Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, do you think it really matters that much in today's NBA?
I think some teams build their rosters upon it. Like you look at what the Pistons have right now. That's a bunch of athletes. And yes, you could say like Cade's skill first, but yeah, that's their top player. The rest of the team's athletes upon athletes. The Thunder, athletes. You look at the Wizards so far, athletes. You look at the Pacers. Like aside from Halliburton, that's a really athletic team, and even then, that's a 6'5" guard. So I think you're seeing size and athleticism. Obviously, skill matters, and I almost think athleticism is being coveted too much. To your point, but I think that the people that are, not as athletic tend to have superior ball IQ and skills. And those are the guys who are the main characters, the people with the ball in their hands. You don't see as many role players fitting in without superior athletic traits. And so that's why I think athleticism is so coveted in drafts.
And I think it's especially coveted here in Washington, getting all these versatile young athletes. So it really is going to be interesting to see if Will Dawkins will pull the trigger on a guy like Danny Wolf, but we'll just have to see. So let us know, guys. Do you think who's the guy that you guys want to pick 18? There's a lot of options out there. We mentioned a lot of names. Are we missing out on anybody? Comment down below. And thank you for making Locked On Wizards your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Abdullah Ayubi. This is Leif Thulin signing out. Hail to the Wizards. Peace.